What's your scariest camping experience? I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning, we're woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally decided to open the tent, and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thoughts going through my head, but mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite. The ranger office is closed and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying, "Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said thank you and walked away. I was about 8. I didn't want to sleep in the tent with my sister, so I slept on a cot under the stars. Woke up to a bear sniffing my head, neck. I was basically paralyzed with fear. The bear left me and went to sniff around for snacks. It made enough noise to wake my parents, who then scared T away. I moved my cot into my sister's tent immediately after. I was pretty young and went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down, and we're about to go to sleep when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together, but then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually, we discover a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill, with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite, and made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound though. Leech on my eyeball at age 10 is still my go-to camping story. Fell asleep in the car, which was carrying some firewood on the roof rack. Woke up with a puffy eye that both mum and dad were saying, "You'll be fine," about without even checking it. We were playing cards and my mum let out this piercing scream and turned away from me. A family friend flicked off the big juiced up leech which had crawled out of my eye and was heading for my nose. I watched the leech burn in the fire while my eyeball bled for a noteworthy 14 tissues. Just 2 weeks ago, I was eating dinner with a buddy on a mountainside in Denali National Park. We heard the sound of rocks tumbling down coming from the steep hillside above us, and my first thought was, "Oh shit, landslide." I turned to look, and about 10 feet away 5 caribou were sprinting down the hillside next to us. I heard more rocks, and close behind them, about 20 feet from me, a wolf was chasing them down the mountain. When it saw us, the wolf stopped next to us and stared for a second and then ran back up the hill to a little outcropping of rock about 60 feet away. It stood there and stared at us for a good half of a minute, took a few steps towards us, and then ran away. We knew there was a wolf den in the area, but I never would have wished to see one so close. I wasn't really afraid for my life since there were 2 of us and only one of him, but it was a very wild experience and my legs were definitely shaking. I was on a trip with the YMCA camp, and on our last day on the trail we got up early to hike the last few miles to where the van to pick us up was. We rounded a turn on the trail and could see the van and a weird swirling dark cloud on the trail ahead. Then the guy in front screamed and all of us were attacked by these big black wasps. I accidentally got one in my hand and it was the size of a cicada. I only got 2 stings, but the 2 guys in front got closer to 10. We hauled ass back up the trail away from the van and our counselor immediately started handing out EPI pens, but none of us turned out to be allergic. We hiked the long way around the wasps to the van, but man, I was shaking the whole time. 10 years ago I went camping for a weekend. Went out hiking the morning of the second day and pretty soon found ourselves off trail on a pretty steep incline along the Menashe River. We were about 100 feet up the incline. Suddenly one of my friends lost his footing and started to slide. On the way down he took out my other friend and I watched them hit every rock and tree on the way down to the rapids. I climbed down to find my one friend dead on the side of the river, and the other taken away by the river. His body was found 2 weeks later 2 kilometers from where they fell. His body, or whatever is left of it, is still in the river because when search and rescue tried to remove it from the logjam it was stuck in, the boulders on the river bank came loose and collapsed on top of his corpse. I was on a camping trip with scouts and me, and my friend was put in the same tent as this weird kid. He was acting up all the time, getting into fights, and showing off how many knives he had. Anyways, one night we were in our tent playing blackjack and I guess I said something that pissed him off cause he started yelling at me. Well, that let the scout leaders know we were still up, so they told us to get to bed. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up to him choking me. I thrashed about and tried to get him off me, but I couldn't focus and I was panicking. I remember the tent seemed to be getting darker, and how heavy my eyelids were getting. My chest and head were hurting and aching trying to get me to breathe, but I just felt so tired. I was starting to fade away, thinking the last thing I would hear was his laughter when wham. My friend had woken up because of me struggling and him laughing and got up and started clobbering the dude. I was part coughing and part breathing once he got off me. My friend screamed for help and that got the adults' attention. He was yelled at for what he did and they shuffled around people so that he would be sleeping in a tent alone right near the adults' tents. I got into a tent with my older brother and I must have woken up 3 times that night kicking and screaming from nightmares of him killing me. When we all got back from the camp, his parents were told what happened and that he was banned from scouts. They also told my mom, and it must have taken the active will of God for her not to go and kick him. He got banned from a bunch of other activities that we both did, so I didn't really ever see him again. I went camping alone. I am a female with only my son who was about 4 at the time. When setting up in a fairly remote place, there was a guy who just stood watching us from about 100 meters away. During the night, we heard footsteps walking around our tent for about half an hour. No other noises. I sat up with a mallet in my hands for the rest of the night. When it got light, I went outside and saw hundreds of emu tracks all over our campsite and a friendly camper neighbor congratulating me on getting the tent up by myself because he wasn't sure I could do it but didn't want to intrude. Hey, if you like the video so far, consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video for more. Once in the wilderness, I and a couple of other guys, drunk as we were, started howling at the moon only to inadvertently attract real wolves. They showed up at our campsite about 1.5 hours later when we were in our hammocks getting ready to sleep. No harm done. They sniffed around for a couple of minutes and then went off. Guess they were disappointed in what they found and luckily not desperately hungry. Anyways, I was very scared and tried to remain completely still and silent during this brief encounter. Solo camp in the middle of nowhere. When I woke up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drunk it in the middle of the night. No sign of anyone anywhere. Sheer terror when I was a kid at Boy Scout summer camp. One kid left a couple of airheads out on the picnic table. Everyone woke up in the middle of the night to, no joke, 30+ raccoons fighting over airheads and going into tents looking for more food. I went on a road trip with some friends to Lake Chelan. We left late and got lost. This was before cell phones. We didn't have a map and trusted my friend's memory. So we pull off the road and decide to camp for the night in a grassy area. We have limited lights and quickly make our tent. We're woken in the morning by someone hitting the tent and screaming to get off his property. We'd inadvertently camped on some poor guy's lawn. We were just dumb 18-year-old kids but have never packed up camp that quickly before. I was camping in Zion National Park in late August 1992. The campground was almost empty by then. At 3:30 in the morning, I woke up in midair. Do you know those dreams where that happens? I figured that's what it was, then I hit the ground. Earthquake. Then I was hearing cracking sounds and a few small thuds. Little bits of the cliff face had sheared off. Thankfully, the campground was far enough from there that no one was injured. Had that happened in the daytime, there's a good chance that a number of people would have been killed. The park was closed for a few days after that, and you couldn't get in or out for much of that day, as one entrance road was just gone, and the other one, a boulder the size of a car, had fallen on it. That one they got open that day and they kicked everyone out of the park. We used to have a pop-up tent trailer with a fiberglass roof. One very early morning we were woken by what we thought was the devil and a band of demons screeching and clawing at the roof of the trailer. Turns out it was a bunch of seagulls fighting over what I found out was a hot dog bun one of the kids tossed up there before we went to bed. Between me yelling, my wife screaming, the kids crying and the seagulls squawking, I'm pretty sure the whole campground was woken up before we figured out what was going on. Camping in the Serengeti with Maasai tribe men as guards. Sitting around the fire when suddenly the Maasai looks out into the pitch blackness and turns the flashlight on, illuminating the eyes of a lion 40 yards out. Just staring at us. I never heard a thing. Went camping in deep Appalachia in a tent. Woke up to a weird feeling that I was laying on something. Then I felt it move. A snake had made its way under my tent and I think it was trying to get warm as it stopped moving right under where my back was. After me moving a bit, it finally went on its merry way. I'll never forget how it felt moving underneath me. I was a kid and on a family camping trip. The rest of the family slept in the trailer and I slept in the Mexican hammock. In the middle of the night, something was forcefully pushing the hammock around and it didn't feel human. It was terrifying. It turned out to be a deer rubbing its antlers on the hammock. First time camping. Was with my wife and dog in a tent. The upper half was mesh and see-through. Woke up around sunrise to my dog growling at something. I leaned forward to check. There's a bear cub walking through our campsite. The scary part was that I didn't want my dog growling to attract the mother of the cub to defend it, so I pinned my dog on the bed and held his mouth to get him to be quiet till the bear left. My heart was beating out of my chest. Later I found out it was an orphan bear and it was friendly to humans and survived by stealing food from garbage campsites. You can share your own story down in the comment below, and thanks for watching the video.